everybody, welcome back to Wing Wednesdays. I'm Tucker, and today we're going to take a look at the Airush Freewing Nitro. Fancy new wing from Airush with the Hokipa fabric. This is some next level fabric. So we're going to walk you through some of the details on this wing and give you my thoughts on it after riding it for a little while here and get into that. All right, so let's get into it. This is the Airush Nitro wing. You'll notice that beautiful white frame. That is your Hokipa material. It is a woven fabric, and it is kind of one of the contenders in the race for that next level frame for kiteboarding and wing foiling materials. So this is what could be the future, folks. I'll give you a quick overview. Some of the features on this wing. Rygo did a video with Clinton, the designer, as well. But just a quick recap so you guys don't need to jump between videos. Some of the quick details on this. Nice big surf handle here. Kind of medium stiffness, enough to give you some control. Definitely big enough to get some gloves in there. And has a nice neoprene patch on it. Going into the leash here, got a swivel with an extension. You can remove that if you find the leash is a little too long, which I did find it a little too long. You got a little cover here you can slide over your swivel here so it doesn't damage your board or your wing or anything like that. But it does tend to kind of slide down occasionally, so slide it back up. As I mentioned, this is a pretty long leash. You can tell it extends out beyond the strut, which actually makes it really easy to flip around if it gets turned around on you. But I did find it a little long, kind of gets in your way a little bit, so you can always tie a knot in it up here just to shorten it up too. So better long than too short, I always say, for the leash. Cuff here, kind of standard wrist cuff. It's comfortable, it's light. It actually has pretty good width on it, so I was able to get this on over my thick wetsuit. Going into our valves here, we have a traditional Boston style valve. If you remember these from back in the day, I actually really like these valves. You can put a lot of air through them. There's a big valve dump here when you take it out, so it deflates incredibly quick. Thing to note though is it's not like other Boston valves where you just put the hose directly on it, like you might get from Slingshot or Ocean Rodeo or Cabrina. This one has either a screw-on or a fat tip pressure fit connection there. And it is included with that fat tip adapter, so you don't need to buy one, which also comes with this fitting where you can actually use a SUP inflatable paddleboard pump as well. So it'll help you adapt the end of that hose so that you can bring one pump with you if you're using an inflatable paddleboard as well as this wing, which is really handy. I think that's a neat idea from them. You got a nice big 9mm dump valve here to help you dump this big fat strut. This thing is huge. I mean, I bet you it's, I don't know, 12 to 14 inches diameter. It's a big strut up front here, and then it kind of tapers off as you go down. You got these nice long basic handles, but they get the job done. You got room to adjust here, and it's just like a nylon coated, there's some structure, kind of a rectangular structure inside there too, but not a whole lot of padding. Just basic, keep it light, keep it simple. You do have harness line loops here, so you can put a harness line, and kind of a similar back handle here where it's rigid enough to stick out and not fold up next to the strut. It's easy to get your hands in there with a glove on, and you have some adjustments, so that's really nice. Looking at the baffle here, you can tell this wing is thickest in the foil profile, somewhere in here. So it's relatively fast. It pulls forward, but also pulls up. There's not, a ton of lift. There's not a ton of forward pull. It's kind of a balance in between, kind of middle ground. So it's good for all different styles of riding, and still has a good speed range. You got a 1 pump here, and it does have a clamp inside. It's nice thick hose, so that does pump up nice and easy. Getting into the canopy here, really nice 2x2 ripstop. It's tough, it's super light. And then they're adding the load frame, which is essentially like a kiteboarding kite line that goes through the canopy here to add stiffness and help resist any kind of bagging, premature bagging of the kite. You know, sort of destroys that perfect foil profile. It's going to reduce any kind of extra stretching that you might get as the kite or as the wing deforms, and disperses that load out to the wingtip. You can see these kind of go out to, you know, where the pressure comes from the wing in the trailing edge and the wingtip. So that really helps stiffen up the entire canopy and help it last longer, which is really cool that they're thinking about making products that last a long time. Coming to the trailing edge here, you'll notice we've got some additional Hokipa material in the trailing edge. This is to help reduce flutter, which just helps the wing fly a little cleaner and also quieter, you know, just for sake of serenity on the water. Got a couple of those. It is a really smooth flying wing. It doesn't chatter a whole lot. So that is some of the basics of it. As I mentioned, you got this Hokipa material, which is pretty special, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So that's the Nitro wing. I would say the most special thing about this wing is the application of the Hokipa fabric. So this fabric is not Dacron, it's not Alula. Those are two different fabrics. It's kind of somewhere in between. It's a woven fabric. It's not a laminate, from what I understand. Whereas like Dacron would be a woven fabric. Alula is a laminate, so it's like multiple layers of material that kind of make up that fabric. Whereas this is kind of woven inside out, almost like Dacron, but a whole lot lighter and a lot stiffer. So this is a very lightweight wing, a very stiff wing, and a lot of that's because of the application of that Hokipa material. And I'm a big fan thus far. As many of you know, I'm a huge fan of the Alula material. I think it is a huge jump forward in wing technology and performance. And Hokipa's kind of doing a similar thing, maybe slightly different. It definitely packs down easier. It's not as kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, but stiff. When you're trying to roll it up or pack it down, it's easier to fold and pack it down into a real small bag, which is why you'll see this backpack. I mean, it's tiny for a 5 meter. It's like a elementary kid's school backpack here, and it fits in that with room to spare. So the material is really soft, really pliable until you pump it up, that is. And that's really kind of where the special bit of the stiffness comes in. The material itself is stiff, of course, it's rigid in terms of that it doesn't stretch, it doesn't, you know, doesn't tear apart essentially when you put in a lot of pressure. But this 5 meter, they recommend 10 PSI. It took 10 PSI without even blinking. I think you could probably go, you know, quite a bit higher than that without even worrying about the wing exploding. But with the thickness of the bladders, you know, really I haven't had any issues with performance at 10 PSI. That was plenty for me. I didn't feel a need to go any higher. It's really not deforming or anything at that point. So easy peasy, and that gives you just a little bit of shock absorption and deflection in the wingtips as you get into higher winds. So it's not quite so raw to ride, just gives you a little bit faster top speed as the wings kind of deflect and flatten out, and helps through the gusts. Not in a way that's removing, you know, a whole lot of grunt and power, but it's just making it a more comfortable ride. So that's pretty special. And really you can see how the leading edge starts pretty big and bulbous and tapers out relatively quickly there towards the wingtips to really reduce that drag and help that wing, you know, twist in the way that it's supposed to, not in a way that kind of ruins your ride or wrecks your power, your pumping performance, but pretty cool stuff. So in terms of the overall shape, this wing is very compact. It's really not high aspect. It has a pretty long cord for a 5 meter. So shorter riders will really like it. you'll find that you can pump a little bit more aggressively without worrying about tapping a wingtip down, which can definitely be helpful. And in terms of speed range for such a compact wing, it's actually really respectable. And again, I would attribute a lot of that to the Hokipa material being so stiff, because you can really gain a lot of extra grunt on the low end because you're not losing any kind of power to the flex of the wing, but also on the high end because it maintains its composure so well. It holds its shape and really lets you drive forward rather than deforming and pulling you downwind. So you can really ride this wing in a huge range of wind. I'm 200 pounds. I rode it in as little as 15 knots. I feel like I could definitely get out lighter than that if I wanted to. And I rode it in as much as upper 20s, 25, 26 knots. Again, with no problem. Really didn't feel completely overpowered at that point. So I would say I could take it to 30. You know, if I really wanted to push it, maybe not ideal, especially if you're doing any kind of technical tricks, but doable, which is really cool to have such a massive range from a single size wing. You know, just with one wing, you know, it's pretty impressive you can do that. And I guess it just helps justify the cost of these more expensive wings. But also it's nice if you're traveling to be able to travel with less gear and still cover a huge range so that you're not sitting on the beach. So yeah, that is kind of the nuts and bolts of this wing and how I've been feeling about it. I would say, you know, it's a pretty middle of the road wing. It surfs well, it jumps well, it free rides well. You know, it's kind of a jack of all trades. You know, it's fast enough to probably be competitive in a race if you know what you're doing, which is awesome. So I've been really stoked on this wing, and while it might not fit into one specific, you know, riding style, I think for a lot of people that'll be a really good thing to be able to kind of do whatever they want, whatever the day is giving you to go out there and have the most fun. So that's been rad. In terms of things I'm not really amped about on this wing, a few nitpicky things. You guys know me, I can always find something to not like. And this isn't necessarily to say that they've got it all wrong, just that, you know, for me, I have other preferences or maybe things could change a little bit to make it a little bit better, in my eyes anyway. So agree, disagree with me, let me know what you think. But the first thing, I'll start at the top. I would have loved to see two of these valves, one for the leading edge, one for the strut. Especially with a next level material like this, you can really push the limits with what kind of stiffness you want, and isolating those bladders would give you control over the leading edge and the strut independently. And you can kind of do that by inflating and then, you know, pinching off and deflating a little bit, but it's just a lot of extra hard work, and you can never make your strut softer than your leading edge. And really, you probably wouldn't want to do that ever necessarily that I can think of, outside the fact that, you know, with this massive strut, you know, you probably don't need as much pressure in it as the leading edge at some points. But, you know, again, a nitpick, I think it's a small detail, but having a separate inflate on both of these would eliminate a few extra valves, complexity when you're doing bladder repairs, points of failure for bladders. So you could have just made it a little simpler, a little cleaner, a little lighter weight, and maybe a little bit more customizable with two independent valves. So if you've watched my videos, you know that's nothing new. I'm always requesting that from brands. Coming down into the handles, I love the simplicity of these handles. I think they're a great length. It's a very comfortable ride when you're holding on to it. I gotta say, the first time I rode this wing, it was in cold weather, and I was really overpowered. I wouldn't say overpowered, I guess. I was well powered. It was, you know, 22 to 25 knots. And I had gloves on, neoprene gloves on because it was cold out. And I absolutely hated the handle position on this wing. And that primarily was because I always want to hold it up here, kind of towards the top of the handle. And as it droops, if you have gloves on, your hands kind of want to slide down to the middle where there's, you know, kind of the bridling middle of that, where it wants to slope to the middle of that slope. but my hand wanted to be up here. So I'd always have to really grip it. I'd be death gripping this thing and trying to keep my hand in the right position. And since it was a brand new wing, number one, this nylon wasn't really broken in yet, so it was less grippy, but also having a thick gloves on really made it a super physical wing to ride because you had to grip it so tight. And if you slid down here, then you're really holding in on your front hand a lot just to keep it from backwinding or overshooting. So I really didn't like it that first time I rode it. Second time I rode it without gloves. The handles were a little bit more broken in, and I changed my harness line position. So that was the other thing I realized that first time where I really didn't like it, is I connected to these kind of standard harness line attachment points, which for me I think are about 3 inches back from center of balance on that wing. So for me, I think if they would have moved the whole handle setup, maybe 3 inches, a lot of that would have been alleviated. But it really has been completely alleviated for me riding without gloves with the handles broken in a little bit. And then connecting my harness line from this back one up to about here, about 3 to 4 inches forward of there, to help balance that out. And it really flew a lot better at that position. It was a lot less physical to fly because you weren't trying to constantly hold in the leading edge. Your hands weren't sliding around as much. You didn't have to muscle it as much just because with that new harness line position, it was kind of just balanced in the right spot. So again, for me, if this was my special custom wing I was making for myself, I would move those handles and harness line attachment points up about 3 to 4 inches. Is it a deal breaker for me? Definitely not, especially if you're not riding with gloves on, and to relocate that front attachment point for your harness line a little further forward. Then it works great. It's awesome. It's super fun to ride, much less physical wing to fly with that adjustment made. So that was probably my biggest issue with the wing, and I kind of just resolved it through some trial and error. And now I really like it. Now that the handle's broken in quite a bit, it's a lot easier to hang on to even with gloves on, and especially with that harness line change. That was a huge change for me, and really helped out. And a certain amount of that was because I was riding well powered, probably higher than they would necessarily recommend for this wing, but it is what it is. I had a 5 to test, and I went out and rode it. It was cold, and I had to wear gloves, so there's really no way around that. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun and a little bit of a learning experience, getting used to that and kind of finding the sweet spot for my hands and for the harness line. So that's my 2 cents on the handles. And really everything else about the wing, I'm a huge fan. I think they nailed the design. I love the load frame that's going to help keep this canopy in the proper shape for a long time, to keep it stiff. I love the Hokipa material, no complaints with this yet. It's just been a ton of fun to try out and compare it to the Alula material. And I would say it's probably the only material I've seen thus far that's a contender for the Alula as kind of the premium fabric in the industry. And if anything that Hokipa has over Alula, I would say it's a little simpler the way they can put it together. They don't require these weird stitching, so that can help cut some weight. And also, as I mentioned before, it's a bit more packable. So if you're really trying to compress it down to as small as possible bag, it's a little easier to fold in that way. I would say Alula is still stiffer. So if you're looking for the ultimate stiffness, especially in a really narrow bladder, in my experience, Alula's been a little better with that. But man, if you just want something that's super light and durable and reliable and packable and have some really next level stiffness as compared to Dacron, Hokipa is definitely something to take a look at and consider. This has been Tucker with MACkiteboarding.com. As always, if you have any questions, put those in the comments section below. Share this video with a friend if you like it. Share it with a friend if you don't like it. And have a little conversation maybe about why not. But let us know what you think. If you've flown this wing, Give us your comments in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. This has been Tucker. We'll see you next time.